Elizabeth Short was born on July 29th of 1924 in Hyde Park, Boston. She was the third out of 5 daughters. Her father, Cleo Alvin, was a sailor in the United States Navy, and her mother, Phoebe May, was a stay-at-home housewife. In 1927, the Short family briefly moved to Portland, Maine, then settled down in Medford, Massachusetts later that year. Cleo began using his money to build mini golf courses, but he lost most of his savings in the stock market crash of 1929. Not long after this, in 1930, his car was found on the Charlestown Bridge, and it was widely believed that he had jumped into the water to end his own life. This tragedy rocked the Short family, and Phoebe had to take over as the provider. She took up a job as a bookkeeper, but life would continue to be difficult and painful for the family. At just 15 years old, Elizabeth had to undergo lung surgery to treat her bronchitis and asthma attacks. The doctors suggested that the family relocate following this surgery because a more mild climate would help to prevent further respiratory issues. Phoebe sent Elizabeth to Florida during the winter with family friends for the next 3 years, and Elizabeth dropped out of high school during sophomore year. In 1942, Phoebe received a letter from Cleo, her husband, who had supposedly been dead for over a decade. The letter apologized for his departure from their lives and explained that he had started a new life in California. At age 18, Elizabeth moved to Vallejo, California to live with her father. The last time Elizabeth had seen her father was when she was just 6 years old. Cleo was now working at the Mare Island Naval Shipyard on San Francisco Bay. Unfortunately, Elizabeth's new living arrangements did not work out. She moved out of her father's house in 1943 due to arguments they had. With no other family in California, Elizabeth took a job at the base exchange at Camp Cook, and she lived with a U.S. Air Force sergeant in Lompoc during this time. However, the sergeant was abusive, and Elizabeth moved out before the end of the year, relocating to Santa Barbara. Her streak of misfortune was not destined to change. On September 23rd of 1943, Elizabeth was arrested for underage drinking at a local bar. The police sent her back to Massachusetts, but Elizabeth had no intentions of returning to the Bay State. Instead, she moved to Florida and rarely contacted her family, only visiting them on occasion. During her time in Florida, Elizabeth met a man named Matthew Michael Gordon Jr., who was a major in the United States Air Force. Matthew was training for deployment to the Asian theater of World War II, but sometime before he left the country, a romance started to blossom. While recovering from a plane crash in India, Matthew wrote a letter to Elizabeth proposing marriage. She accepted the proposal, but Elizabeth's luck had already been proven to be foul. Matthew perished in another plane crash on August 10th of 1945. Elizabeth relocated yet again in July of 1946, visiting a friend in Los Angeles named Joseph Gordon Fickling, who happened to be an Air Force lieutenant. She began working as a waitress and rented a room on Hollywood Boulevard. According to various sources, Elizabeth had dreams of becoming an actress and starring on the big screen. She did not have any jobs or credits, but her aspirations were lofty. Unfortunately, Elizabeth would never get the chance to pursue her dreams. On January 9th of 1947, Elizabeth returned home after a trip to San Diego. She had gone away with Robert Manley, a married salesman whom she was dating at the time. Robert dropped Elizabeth off at the Biltmore Hotel, where she had plans to meet up with one of her sisters who was visiting from Boston. Some of the staff at the hotel remembered seeing Elizabeth using the lobby telephone, then she was reportedly seen by patrons at the Crown Grill cocktail lounge just down the street from the hotel. After this, her movements are unknown. On January 15th of 1947, a mother was taking her child for a morning walk in Leimert Park when she stumbled across a horrifying discovery. Elizabeth Short's body was completely naked and severed at the waist, resulting in her remains being in 2 separate pieces. Her body was drained of blood, which caused her skin to be extremely pale. The authorities confiscated the remains and the investigation began. The medical examiners determined that Elizabeth had been dead for roughly 10 hours before the mother found her body. The killer had washed the body before dumping it in Leimert Park, and her face had been slashed from each side of her mouth to her ears. There were cuts on her thighs and breasts, not to mention entire chunks of flesh missing. The remains had been erected in a pose by the killer, with her hands above her head, her elbows positioned at right angles, and her legs spread apart. The detectives made 2 more discoveries when they arrived on scene. There was a heel print amongst tire tracks on the ground and a cement sack containing watery blood near the site of the body. The autopsy revealed that there was very little bruising along the incision line through Elizabeth's waist, suggesting that she had already been dead when she was bisected. There was bruising on her scalp and a small amount of bleeding in the brain, indicating blunt force trauma to the head. The cause of death was determined to be hemorrhaging from the cuts to her face, as well as the blunt force trauma to her skull. It's unclear whether or not Elizabeth was SA'd. The FBI was able to identify her with the fingerprints from her arrest in 1943. Almost immediately after this, reporters from the Los Angeles Examiner contacted Phoebe and told her that Elizabeth had won a beauty contest. They used this lie as a means of getting as much information about her from Phoebe as they could, and once they were satisfied with the information they had, they dropped the bomb that Elizabeth had been murdered. The media was incredibly disingenuous with Elizabeth's case. Some papers claimed that she had been wearing seductive clothing, while others stated that she was an adventuress who prowled Hollywood Boulevard. On January 21st of 1947, the editor of the Examiner, James Richardson, received a phone call from a person who was claiming to be Elizabeth's killer. He congratulated Richardson on his paper's coverage of the murder and claimed that he was going to turn himself in eventually, but he wanted the authorities to chase him for a little while longer. He also said the chilling phrase, "Expect some souvenirs of Beth Short in the mail." On January 24th of that year, a manila envelope addressed to the Los Angeles Examiner and other Los Angeles papers was found. The envelope's writing had been constructed from individually cut out letters from newspapers. It contained Elizabeth's birth certificate, business cards, several photographs, pieces of paper with names written on them, and an address book with the name Mark Hansen on the cover. The killer had cleaned the envelope in an attempt to remove any forensic evidence, but investigators were able to get partial fingerprints. However, these fingerprints were compromised on the way to the FBI, and they were never able to be analyzed. That same day, a handbag and a singular black shoe were found on top of a garbage can in an alley a short distance from the crime scene. These items have been cleaned in a similar fashion to the others. On January 26th, the Examiner received another letter from the killer, but this one was handwritten. It read, "Here it is, turning in Wednesday, January 29th, 10 a.m. Had my fun at police, Black Dahlia Avenger." There was a location where the killer claimed he would turn himself in. The police waited at the location on January 29th, but the killer never showed up. At 1 p.m. that day, the Examiner received another letter constructed from cut-out newspaper clippings that stated, "Have changed my mind. You would not give me a square deal. Dahlia killing was justified." The media continued to sensationalize Elizabeth's murder, making claims that she was tortured for hours and that the motive had been sexual, neither of which were substantiated by a shred of evidence. Another letter the Examiner received said, "I will give up on Dahlia killing if I get 10 years. Don't try to find me." On February 1st, the Los Angeles Daily News stated that the case had hit a dead end and there was no new information coming in. The lead investigator, Captain Jack Donahue, was interviewed. Donahue stated that he believed Elizabeth had been murdered in a remote building on the outskirts of the city, then her body was transported into the city for disposal. The police also considered the possibility that the killer was a medical professional due to the precise nature of the cuts on Elizabeth's body. That February, the Los Angeles Police Department executed a search warrant at the University of Southern California Medical School, which was near the location of the body. Background checks were conducted on all the students, but nothing came of these efforts. On March 14th of that year, a beach caretaker discovered a suicide note that had been written in pencil inside a shoe near Breeze Avenue in Venice, LA. The note stated, "To whom it may concern, I have waited for the police to capture me for the Black Dahlia killing, but have not. I am too much of a coward to turn myself in, so this is the best way out for me. I couldn't help myself for that or this. Sorry, Mary." The police soon identified Mark Hansen as a suspect in the case. Hansen was a wealthy man owning a nightclub and a theater in Los Angeles. Elizabeth had stayed at his home with some friends at least once, and Hansen was the one who identified the handbag and shoe as belonging to the victim. One of Elizabeth's friends also stated that Elizabeth had recently rejected Hansen's sexual advances, which she believed could have been the motive for the murder. However, after extensively questioning and investigating Hansen, the authorities cleared him of suspicion. During the course of the investigation, the police interviewed more than 150 people, including Robert Manley, who passed multiple polygraph exams and was cleared of suspicion. Numerous men from Hanson's address book were investigated as well. In addition to the interviews, various sections of land were searched for further evidence, but this did not turn up any new leads. A $10,000 reward was offered by a city councilman, which caused several people to come forward with false confessions. Some of these people were charged with obstruction of justice for their brazen attempt to take advantage of a homicide case. In the years following the murder, more than 500 additional people have confessed to killing Elizabeth. Some of these people had not even been born at the time of the murder. In 2003, one of the detectives on the case, Ralph Asdell, stated that he believed he had actually interviewed the killer back in 1947. The man in question had been seen parked in a sedan near the area where Elizabeth's body was found on the morning of the discovery. A neighbor was driving by when they noticed the sedan with its right rear door open. The man in question appeared to be extremely startled by the presence of the neighbor, and he peered through the window before returning to his own vehicle. The sedan owner was reportedly cleared of suspicion at some point, but Asdell believed he was the killer. Another suspect was a man named George Hodel, who was accused of the murder by his son after his death. Hodel's son cited his training as a surgeon as evidence. Furthermore, Hodel's secretary, Ruth Spaulding, had died prior to Elizabeth's murder, and the police had suspected something was amiss in her death. The authorities wiretapped Hodel's home and recorded a conversation between him and an unidentified man. The unidentified man said, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary because she's dead. They thought there was something fishy. Anyway, now they may have figured it out. Killed her. Maybe I did kill my secretary." Over the years, numerous other suspects have been looked into, and various other murders have been thought to be linked to Elizabeth Shorts. Regardless, nothing has ever been confirmed, and Elizabeth's killer has never been identified. To this day, the Black Dahlia murder remains one of the country's most infamous unsolved mysteries. Cole Brings Plenty was best known for his role in the television series 1923, which is a spin-off of the highly popular series Yellowstone. Cole played the role of Pete Plenty Clouds, a Native American sheep herder. Although this was probably his most famous role, he also had parts in the TV shows Into the Wild Frontier and The Tall Tales of Jim Bridger, which are both Western-style series. Before his television career, Cole had attended Haskell Indian Nations University in Lawrence, Kansas. He provided some much-needed representation for people of Native American heritage in American television. Unfortunately, Cole's private life was not as inspiring as his public life. On March 31st of this year, 2024, the police responded to a call about a female screaming for help at an apartment in Lawrence. The apartment was Cole's place of residence, and he had fled the scene before the police arrived. Traffic cameras showed the 27-year-old actor driving out of Lawrence on the US 59 highway. The authorities appealed to the public for help in finding Cole, who was wanted for charges related to the domestic disturbance. The victim in the domestic violence incident was Cole's 20-year-old neighbor, who had been engaged in a casual relationship with the actor for several months. After fleeing the city, Cole Brings Plenty went missing. His neighbor posted the following message on her Facebook account. "Remember, Cole is missing because he broke into my house and strangled me. I struggled to fight him off. He dragged me down the stairs outside of my apartment. I screamed for help, so he ran away and drove off. If you see him, call the cops." The police conducted a search for the actor, which lasted 4 days. On April 5th, they found his body in Edgerton, Kansas, about 28 miles away from Lawrence. The corpse was near a construction site where Cole had abandoned his car. The police did not and do not suspect foul play in his death. However, the local police in Lawrence have been facing criticism for the way they handled the situation. According to critics, the police treated Cole as a criminal fugitive rather than as a person in crisis. In response to this, Police Chief Rich Lockhart stated that, "This is a tragic case for everyone involved. Your police department worked very hard to investigate the incidents and worked very hard to find Cole. None of us could have imagined this outcome. This wasn't the only area of critique in the case. The relationship between law enforcement and Native American populations was also questioned as a result of this incident. Lockhart stated that, "I learned through this series of events that our police department must work harder to increase trust with our Native American community members. Through meeting with Cole's family members and members of our Native American community, I clearly see that we are not where we need to be in partnering with a community that is very important to Lawrence's history and to its current culture." One final detail about the case is that the victim of Cole's attack received a barrage of threats on her Facebook page, as well as accusations that she was not being entirely truthful in her allegations. According to her, Cole climbed through her window after he ignored several phone calls from him, after which he attacked her in her room. Their fight eventually made it outside, where the victim was seen standing outside the apartment naked from the waist down, while Cole ran to his car. He drove to a gas station in Baldwin City, then to another gas station in Gardner, then finally to a TA Express mini-mart. The manager at the mini-mart reported that Cole was fidgety and distressed. He purchased some groceries and then left the store. The autopsy results have not yet been publicly released, but the authorities do not suspect foul play. Detectives reportedly told several people that they suspect he took his own life. Click the join button to become a member today. Channel members receive exclusive content as well as early access to all my content. Jonshel Alexander was only 12 years old when she made her acting debut as Joy Strong in the film Beasts of the Southern Wild. The movie would end up receiving 4 Academy Award nominations and was clearly well received by critics. Jonshel was too old to play the lead in the film, but she impressed the production team so much that they cast her as a supporting character. The director, Ben Zeitlin, stated that, "We incorporated a part into the film that was very much inspired by her. A lot of the lines were written by her, and so much of the character grew out of who Jonshel was. Her character in the film is named Joy Strong, which always seemed like a perfect description of Jonshel. She was a really bright burning light." Jonshel's mother described her as feisty, jazzy, spoiled. It was her way or no way. Jonshel was like, "It's going to be me." On November 27th of 2021, Jonshel was in the passenger seat of a car on the 1500th block of North Claiborne Avenue in New Orleans while an unidentified man drove the vehicle. At around 9 p.m., Jonshel and the man were both shot. The man immediately drove to a hospital where paramedics declared Jonshel dead. She was only 22 years old. Everyone who knew her was devastated by the murder. Jonshel had done nothing wrong. She was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. The investigators identified a vehicle of interest in the case, which was a maroon pickup truck. They suspected it had been driven by the killer, and they released this photo of their person of interest. Unfortunately, it's unclear whether or not there have been any recent developments in the case. Jonshel was the youngest of 3 children who grew up in New Orleans. From a young age, she had a creative personality and a healthy dose of ambition, participating in cheerleading, dance classes, modeling, and acting school. She attended Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Charter High School and worked as a hostess in local restaurants after graduation. She had a 1-year-old daughter named Devon, to whom she devoted herself. By all accounts, Jonshel was not only a talented actress, but also a fantastic person who nobody had any complaints about. Her family and friends undoubtedly miss her sorely. If you have any information about Jonshel's murder, contact the authorities immediately.